All right, welcome back to another episode of EventHubs Talking Block. I am John Catalyst Gray, and with me as always is John Velociraptor Guerrero.
We have a spicy meatball for you today. This is going to be a discussion. I hope it's a discussion, doesn't blow up into more than that. But we're looking at Street Fighter 3 versus Street Fighter 4, which is the better Street Fighter game. For those of you that are still here and have not yet gone to the comments, thank you so much. Please like, comment, subscribe. We're going to just explore these two games the best we can. We've done a little research. We've been around. We've kind of been observing. We know our way around a fighting game or two. And just kind of hash stuff out. We'll give our own opinions at the end. But really, this is more, let's just examine these games. Let's see. And it depends on the individual, what kind of aspects you prioritize over others. But that's sort of the spirit we're approaching this with. I want to double check with you though, John. Is that the spirit that you're approaching this with?
No, I'm just basically going to tell you to F off.
Great,
and that you're
okay.
wrong on everything, and that's, I'm basically simulating the comments for you. But yes, no, that is exactly what we're trying to do.
All right, so a little bit of a preamble here on Street Fighter 3 to get us started. But Street Fighter 3 came out in 1997, and was supported for the next 2 years with updates including Second Impact and eventually the highly revered Third Strike. It would eventually produce a 20-character cast if we include Gil, and 16 of those characters were brand new to the franchise, as the game was actually not slated to be a Street Fighter game when it first began production back in 1994. The goal was to sell some 50 to 60,000 arcade units for this game, because that would replicate the success of Street Fighter 2, but reports suggest that it's very likely that it sold fewer than 10,000 arcade units, with more conservative estimates suggesting the number was closer to 2,000. So a very big failure in some respects, but also at the same time, Street Fighter 3 is often regarded as the greatest fighting game, not just Street Fighter game, but fighting game of all time by many people, at least by GameSpot and by IGN in recent years.
Yeah, so you do say that Street Fighter 3 may be the best fighting game ever created in some people's eyes, and then people who say this are not wrong, but I don't know if they're right either. While it's not my personal opinion, the point of contention is larger than just my opinion. I'm making the case based on talking to people in the FGC and my own experiences, and that case is valid, that you could argue that Street Fighter 3 is the pinnacle of fighting games, that it never has been done better and never will be done better. And some at Capcom actually feel that way as well. And that's why it took so long for Street Fighter 4 to arrive nearly a decade later, because people at Capcom said, like, look, we can't make a better game than Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. This is impossible. We have done the best that we possibly could do. It didn't go over well. Like, we're out of there. In the case against Street Fighter 4 here is that we have seen multiple people say Street Fighter 3 is the best fighting game ever. How often have you heard people say that about Street Fighter 4 on a mass scale? And it's not anywhere near that. So yeah, it's a point of contention. So it's Ono, and actually just to finish up on that, Ono actually brought back Street Fighter 4 on the premise that we're going to bring back Street Fighter 2. We're going to make the game more simple, more easy to get into, because Street Fighter 3 was so complex and so difficult. They're like, we need to bring back a more simple and more easy game, and then they actually made the most technical game in the entire series for very bad reasons and very awful things like option selects, which we'll get into here in a second.
Your favorite thing. Yeah, so maybe one of the first places we could go is the beginnings of each game, and the atmosphere that Capcom was operating in, the decisions they made with the release of these games. Because as far as I can see it, we talk about Street Fighter V's release as being one of the worst in modern times, and it absolutely is. Street Fighter 3, the decisions that they made, although in some ways were good, it was not good for what was in front of them. It was not good. They were not good for the times. They did not make a lot of sense with what was going on around them, and they kind of failed to acknowledge a handful of things, and I'll kind of just go through here. This was, again, 1997. 3D was now a thing. This was between Tekken 2 and 3. Killer Instinct was already rolling around, and so was Virtua Fighter. So there was a general expectation that the new thing should probably be 3D. You don't have to, but that's where the public was. And they chose to go with, it was updated graphics. It was a higher, like a higher amount of memory and such that you needed in order to run these CPS 3 boards. And there was
it was a brand new engine, as you say. They went from CPS2 to CPS3, which they actually, I believe, set the Guinness World Record for most hand-drawn animation frames. And the pixel art in Street Fighter 3 is beautiful.
Yes,
it is a beautiful game still to this very day.
Yeah, and you can tell. Well, I'll get into the artwork in a little bit, but so they made this decision to do to go for the two-dimensional approach. Fair enough. It didn't line up with the things at the times. They also, in doing this, basically put their eggs into the arcade basket at a time where arcades were widely on their way out. And because of the way they did it, the current consoles of the time, PS1 era, they couldn't support what was going on in Third Strike, or I'm sorry, in Street Fighter 3. So they didn't really have the immediate option to go to console, and that's where the entire group was headed. Now, eventually, PS2 came out, and I think it was 2000, and there were some ports. So eventually, it did make it to consoles. But when they first were setting things up, they didn't have this in the plan. So they had the 2D, they had arcades in an era where we were heading to console, and then the third thing is that, like I said earlier, this wasn't a Street Fighter game to begin with, and a lot of the characters were not well received. They were not recognizable. They were brand new. And yes, eventually Street Fighter 3 has now become known for having some of the best characters in the franchise, but it also has a lot of duds. And if you read through the Polygon oral history for Street Fighter 3, where they interviewed a bunch of the developers, there's a handful of different times where different developers said, yeah, I looked at this cast of characters and I thought it was bland. I said it looked nicer than I truly thought. I thought we were in trouble. It really didn't resonate. And so there was a lot going wrong with a lot of the early decisions in Street Fighter 3.
Yeah, and then you contrast that with Street Fighter 4, which maybe has the best roster we've ever seen in a Street Fighter game. I would argue it's my favorite overall. I think it beats 5. I think it beats everything that we've ever seen. And then, as you say, with Street Fighter 3, some of the roster members have held up over time. I think Dudley, Ibuki, a handful of others have kind of transcended that game and become very popular. Alex, of course. But overall, pound for pound, I think it's the worst roster in the entire franchise. I would take the Alpha games over it. Street Fighter 1 not included here. We generally throw Street Fighter 1 out the door because it was such a primitive version of what we know and love. But yeah, it's quite fascinating. And then to mention also, I haven't touched on this yet, but the character balance in Street Fighter 3 is maybe the worst in the entire franchise. There is a huge gap between Yun and Chun-Li, and then like a pack of viable characters, and then the rest of the cast. And then Yun and Chun-Li have this disgustingly high advantage. Take Luke, give him some steroids, and there you have Street Fighter 3 Chun-Li.
Absolutely, and that's I have some stuff to say on that. But as far as the release of Street Fighter 4 and contrasting it with what was going on with Street Fighter 3 some 10 years or so earlier, Street Fighter 4 rolls out, and well, I should say this: Street Fighter 3's lack of success, some people call that failure, led to like 8 years where there was no Street Fighter action. Mortal Kombat continues, Tekken continues, all this stuff, but we don't have a new Street Fighter for a long time, until like late 2008, 2009, when Street Fighter 4 rolls out. And Street Fighter 4, like you say, has a decent cast of characters. It now offers online functionality, which was just a matter of when this game rolled out. But the fact that it was there and there wasn't an expectation was like online was there as a bonus.
No. That's wrong. There actually was a huge expectation among fighting game players, and it is Street Fighter 4 was actually supposed to get rollback code, but it never really did, officially at least. It was delay based, right? And Dragon Ball FighterZ fans are going to laugh.
Well, when I say there wasn't an expectation, I mean like when we think about online today, there are certain things that you're like, if it's not rollback and if it's not to a certain level of playability, then I'm not even going to touch it. I'm not going to take it seriously. But when Street Fighter 4 rolled out, people were like, well, I'm expecting to play this like a traditional Street Fighter with my friends and whatnot, couch co-op and whatnot, or not co-op, but couch competition. But then the fact that I can go online is viewed as bonus, as opposed to, if this isn't pristine, I'm going to trash this game and I'm going to write negatively about it online and such. And so that's what I mean when I say there wasn't as much of an expectation as there is now.
Definitely the expectation has grown, but there were quite a few people, especially Third Strike fans back in the day, who were playing the game on GGPO. But not only that, but a year prior, Capcom had released Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, which was, I really loved that game. And that had rollback code in it as well. So it wasn't like Capcom was like, oh, we have no experience with rollback code or no idea and whatnot. They had put GGPO into their games. They had done a bunch of other stuff. So Street Fighter 4 was actually a very solid step backwards, and people were pretty pissed off about that. And Ono at that time actually said they could not figure out how to get like the GPU and CPU requirements to get Street Fighter 4 running on rollback properly, because Street Fighter 4 takes a lot more horsepower than Third Strike does, right? 3D models, all that other kind of stuff. But the thing about it is that was bullcrap, because they actually did it in 2012. That was 4 years later. Granted, that was, because Street Fighter 4 mainly came out in 2008 in arcades and other stuff. But they actually released Street Fighter Cross Tekken with rollback code running pretty much the same exact graphic engine, models, all that other kind of stuff. They could do rollback code, but they did the classic Dragon Ball FighterZ thing and said, oh, it's too hard. And so not a lot of people were livid, but if you played online a lot like I did, and you played HD Remix and you played Street Fighter 3, this is like, hey, here's a brand new version of Street Fighter, but the netcode is way worse, like just considerably worse. And it was like, what the heck? Like, you guys had got this stuff figured out, and now you take like 2 steps back. It's like, what are you doing?
Well, because people at that time were willing to play they're willing to go to their locals. They're willing to remember the boom of traveling to major events when Street Fighter 4 came in. This was like a golden age and a rising tide that carried all ships. We saw Evo get to new heights and have a whole bunch of other games benefited from Street Fighter 4's boom and success, and then they added to that success as well, things like Marvel vs. Capcom and Mortal Kombat 9 and such. But people were primarily, like, there was online, and that was its own side thing that you could do, but it wasn't even the same experience because of how far away online play was from playing on offline.
Well, again, if you had rollback code, it wasn't that bad. But yes, with delay-based code, it was a very large difference in there.
I mean, Street Fighter 5 came out in 2016 with rollback code, and even at that point, it still wasn't at a level where...
I just spoke with Idom about this, the Capcom Cup champion, asked him what the difference is between playing on a fiber connection and then offline. He said pretty much no difference.
Yeah, but no one had a fiber connection at that point, and the standard for what you would get when you were online wasn't going to be... And as the general public perceived it, which is the significant thing here, because we're talking about how people received these games when they first rolled out and the impact that they had. Street Fighter 3 essentially saw a lot of general people, a lot of the general public say, I'm going to go do something else. And Street Fighter 4 saw a ton of people come in and say, I'm going to travel and go to major events and watch this on stream and this is and that. So just in comparing the boom that both came in with their initial like grand entrances, I think was very different.
Yeah, the boom for Street Fighter 4 the game was way better received than Street Fighter 3. But if you want to go back and play both games right now, and you want to do it through official means, you can get rollback code with Street Fighter 3 and go play it online. Street Fighter 4 literally has the worst netcode of any modern Street Fighter game because it lacks rollback.
Yeah.
And so if you want to go play it now, which I just did the other day, it's terrible. It is a god-awful experience where Street Fighter 3, I can go in there and play it and still have a very good experience. And that's like right here, right now. This is not, a decade ago or whatever. This is literally what exists today. And Street Fighter 4's netcode is complete and total garbage. It's not like, oh, it's acceptable. It is destructively bad. Mm-hmm. It is awful. Completely and totally awful.
I was thinking about this because Street Fighter 3 wasn't designed with online play really in mind almost at all. And then Street Fighter 4 was designed with online play, like I said, more in the realm of this can be a bonus, but it's not necessarily an expectation that if we fail in any way to check this box, it's going to massively harm our game. We weren't quite there yet. And so I give a little bit of benefit of the doubt, so to speak, for those things. But now it's like, yeah, if you're talking about playing them in modern times, you really do need online play. And I would say that Third Strike has better online right now. Now, inevitably, Street Fighter 4 is going to get its re-release, its remake. Yeah. It might be in a package with Street Fighter 3 for the 800th time, being re-released or remastered. And I'm sure one of the checkboxes is going to have rollback netcode. And it'll be retroactively, improved. But yes, for where things stand right now, Street Fighter 4 is inferior in terms of online play, I would say, to the options you have for Street Fighter 3.
Yeah. Well, speaking of options, let's talk about option selects. Because they basically, you enter the Konami code up, down, left, right, BA, start. And the game chooses what option to do for you, and it chooses the best option. Mm-hmm. And basically, so you're not even playing the game yourself, you're just entering codes in certain situations that pop up here in Street Fighter 4. And Capcom hated this so much, they tried to remove every single one of these from the game in the next version. And they actually went back multiple times when they found option selects in Street Fighter V, and they specifically patched them out, costing them money and quite a bit of time and energy and effort to do so. Capcom hated option selects to such a heavy degree, they tried to remove any and all trace from them for the next game. And not only are option selects like, something in Street Fighter 4, like you literally, they're not something you could ignore. You have to heavily bake them into your strategy at all levels of play, especially at the high end, but even at the lower ends, like the tech throw, like you basically have to do that to play this game. And it destroys the entire game from a gameplay standpoint, in my opinion, because all of a sudden I'm not even really playing against you. I'm playing against a computer, and a computer that's going to choose the best option every single time if you input the code correctly.
Yeah, option selects were one of the biggest mustard stains, shall we say, on Street Fighter 4's gameplay. And I think that's a good place to go, is to kind of compare the general gameplay, the pluses and the minuses of both overall experiences. And for something like this, I do think that it's okay to consider some of the problems that were earlier on in both games' lifespans, but really, like, the ultimate analysis should be on like the final product once they sort of learn lessons and move through. So, like, for instance, Street Fighter 4 had unblockables, and a lot of those were removed, perhaps not all of them, but things were done to try to offset the vortex option selects that were so prevalent, especially in the middle versions of that. And Street Fighter 3 had its own journey and whatnot, but yeah, Street Fighter 4, in terms of gameplay and such, which one of here's a question. Let me put it to you this way, John. Just generally speaking, which game is more fun to play? And there's two answers here: at a casual level and at a highly skilled level.
Street Fighter 3 is the answer to both.
To both.
Yes.
Now, I disagree when you say Street Fighter 3 is more fun at a casual level. Let me tell you why, and then ask your response and where you might disagree. Street Fighter 3 doesn't have, or I should say Street Fighter 4 evolved from Street Fighter 3, and some of the things that they did was they added more lenient inputs so that you could get uppercuts and stuff like that through shortcuts, so it was easier execution, although you'd still had higher difficulty execution if you wanted to do things like one-frame links and such. But the key things are that, and then in the mechanic. And the mechanic, as we've seen, is so important, the global mechanic that any given Street Fighter game is going to have. Street Fighter 4 was the focus attack. Street Fighter 3 was the parry. Now, the focus attack had two components of it. The first of which was you just hold two buttons and your character charges up, can absorb two hits, and then if you charge all the way, can release this unblockable attack. That was intuitive enough that if you were a brand new player, you could sit down and after just a round or two, you could start to formulate ideas about and intuit ideas on how you would implement this into your game plan, and it was fun. And I remember specifically doing that. I'm just going to get a knockdown and then do level 3 on my opponent's wake up, and there's no way to escape it because we hadn't realized yet that backdashes or reversals and whatnot were a thing. But it was immediately appealing as a new player, and I think that was very true for virtually anyone that joined. Now, it also had a second component, the FADC, which was much more for skilled players, and I think this is actually used more often once you got into the groove of the game. But there was two components to it. One was for newcomers, and one was for more advanced players. Contrast that with Street Fighter 3. With one, it's more difficult to control your character, to do things, to execute. But also that parry, I think there are a lot of casuals that played their entire Street Fighter 3 careers, so to speak, and never really entertained parry. Maybe it happens sometimes here and there on accident, but you don't base your entire game plan around it until you've really ascended into the higher levels.
Even my 8-year-old son was doing parries. Like, he had no idea what he was doing. He was just mashing around and stuff, and parries would come out.
Yeah, sometimes they come out, but you're not in order to parry something with enough intent and then get the punish appropriate, like that's a completely different thing than sometimes parry happens.
Yeah, but I mean, it's no difference in casuals playing, with the focus attack. The focus attack is an evolution of the parry. It literally has heavy elements of the parry. That is why the focus attack exists in Street Fighter 4, was to make a simple version of the parry. But to throw your own argument back at you, Street Fighter 4 is the most technical game in the entire franchise. Like, it is ridiculous because you have to use the option selects at high levels of play.
At high levels.
You have to enter in those. Yes, at high levels of play, it is the most technical game in the entire franchise. It is ridiculous, the execution and other stuff you need. And those one-frame links that you're talking about, especially online, oh my gosh, online, they're devastating. Mm-hmm. Like, to try to hit those and to drop them. But you have to have one-frame links down, and so that means plinking and double tapping and doing all this other kind of stuff to get your combos out consistently, where in these other games the input windows for them, the other stuff, like they were not as brutal. You had a lot of more like 2 or 3 frame links and other stuff in there, where Street Fighter 4 is like, heck with that noise, we're going to give all these characters 1 frame links and you have to do them and you have to hit them perfectly, and it's like there's no buffer, there's no anything. It's like Street Fighter 4, this is something Capcom talked about a lot, is the most technical game in the entire franchise, but to its detriment. That's why Street Fighter 5 turned out the way it is. They're like, we're going to dial back the execution because this has created such a far gap between the high end and the low end that we don't like this.
Yeah, I do think that at the highest level, yes, because it requires 1 frame links, it requires that execution, and there were plenty of, learning the option selects were in and of themselves a whole series of things, for single little animations to come out. But that said, I think people could pick up Street Fighter 4 much more easily and just get in there and start doing the basic things, start using focus attack and start, jumping around, not doing huge combos with links, in the same way that you wouldn't be doing huge combos with any links in Street Fighter 3 or any other game. But I do think that the Street Fighter 4 and its mechanics were more conspicuous and inviting to players compared to Street Fighter 3. And again, another big part of that is the fact that just basic special move execution was even easier in Street Fighter 4.
Yeah, and there was input leniency in Street Fighter 3 as well.
It's been growing since Street Fighter. Well, since Street Fighter 1, because it was just
Street
huge
Fighter,
pain there.
Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition is actually where most people noticed it, because Capcom took the DP motion from forward to a full fireball to forward plus down forward.
Mm-hmm.
They took off an extra thing on there, and they made other stuff easier to execute then. So the ability to execute moves has gotten easier and easier over time. That's like been a constant from Capcom, as you mentioned, mostly highlighted by Street Fighter 1 when like negative edge became a thing.
So in terms of gameplay here, I would say that here's the way I see it. Street Fighter 4, I would say, if you think of these two games as like mountains to climb, Street Fighter 3 has a bigger prize at the top. If you go to the top of Street Fighter 3 and you explore this game skill-wise and you really learn it, what it can produce and what it allows you to do as a fighting game player is unrivaled. And if that is the most important thing to you, and it very well could be, for a lot of people it is, I do agree, it's the best fighting game in terms of creating that atmosphere where you have a sense of autonomy, where you don't feel as robbed. I'm not saying that you don't get robbed, but what you put in is what you're going to get out, and there's not a whole bunch of little extra bonuses and training wheels that your opponent might be using to skip steps and get wins over you in Street Fighter 3. But the invitation at the bottom of the mountain to even begin climbing, Street Fighter 3 is widely failed at that for a handful of the reasons I've listed out. It's not accessible, didn't have a lot of the characters at the beginning, it wasn't on the right platform for the times, all of this kind of stuff, where Street Fighter 4 did all of those things correctly and was more inviting, I would say, with its gameplay initially. But you can only go so high with Street Fighter 4 on its particular mountain, and the rewards, while they were great, we had some amazing high-level matches with Street Fighter 4, some amazing moments. None of them got close to moment 37, right? But you did have, interestingly enough, featuring Daigo as well. You had like the Gamer Bee Ume Shoryu sequence at DreamHack. You had the Momochi Stunfest combo. And actually at the DreamHack, you also had Gandhi, for what that's worth. Maybe that was actually a mark against Street Fighter 4. But my point is...
also had the Punko against Daigo as well.
Punko and Daigo, yeah.
You know what? I can DP, and I can DP as well, and here we go.
It's going crazy.
So, yeah. As much as people complain about Street Fighter 5, where's the equivalent there? And it's like, just DP, 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 and it's like...
Well, but there was a sense of fun in that, and I haven't been able to quite put my hand on this, but or my finger on this, and the exact reason why, but there is a difference in this, something in the equation of the risk and reward and the feel and the flow of the game, where yes, I lost my mind plenty of times playing Street Fighter 4, especially online, but nothing like the feelings that I would come away with in Street Fighter 5. And we're not talking about 5 here, but the idea is that there was a flow, the sense of balance of risk and reward in 4 was as such that it still was motivating to continue to play and explore, and it was ultimately, it was a certain level of fun that really did things for the franchise and for the fighting game community in general, as evidenced by Street Fighter 4's massive success in the tournament circuit and in like turning people's heads back to the franchise.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to talk about longevity. And you look and you compare the two games right now, and there's a vibrant and active scene for Street Fighter 3 right now. Where's all the Street Fighter 4 players? You don't see it at tournament. You don't see it nearly as often. I would argue, and this is hard to quantify, but I would argue the Third Strike community is a good bit larger than the Street Fighter 4 community, and I'm not saying that Street Fighter 4 like completely blows for these reasons, but there was a tournament level player who thought the game was such garbage for a variety of reasons, and he would enter tournaments and troll with El Fuerte and place in events because he thought the game was just such garbage and so awful. And then later on, the developers of the game put in bonkers stuff for El Fuerte, who's a very powerful troll character in the last game, and he's just ridiculous and should not have existed that way, and super bad design in the last part of the game. Shouts to Kai here, who we're talking about, but he hated Street Fighter 4 with such a passion, thought it was just such a dumb game that he would just go in there and troll people, and was very successful at it with the troll character of El Fuerte.
I played with Kai a lot at majors and at just Super Arcade, and yes, very much experienced that. Good, bad times. I suppose that's a good transition here to get into some of the character discussion, because it's no secret around here. El Fuerte is one of my most hated characters of all time. I guess I ranked him lowest on our Street Fighter character ranked list. We ranked every Street Fighter character, and there's a video, and it exists on your screen right now somewhere, but don't watch that right now. Watch it after this, check that out. But yeah, Street Fighter 3, like I said, introduced 16 newcomers to the franchise when it was all said and done. Street Fighter 4 only introduced 11. So yeah, let's get into it here. Two things. One, the overall cast of characters we'll talk about, but first I want to talk about just the newcomers and how strong were the newcomers in your opinion. Let's start with Street Fighter 3. What are some of the standouts that you can talk about, either the highs or the lows?
I mean, I really like Yun and Yang, Alex. But again, I've mentioned before that Street Fighter 4 has the best roster probably in the entire franchise. So there are good characters that have stood the test of time in Street Fighter 3. But again, I'm not going to argue for this game. It's yeah. There's the characters like Elena in there, who people do not like for a variety of reasons. You've got some other duds like Necro, Oro. I know Q is in there, who people really like. That's a great character.
It's weird that he hasn't been brought back yet, with how much love there seems to be for Q, and I don't disagree with it. I think he's got a cool design. I think he's got cool music. He's very intriguing, and yet no Q, nowhere to be seen. So. Yeah. That's weird to me.
And then Sean and 12. I mean, there's some really bad characters in there that it's just like, yeah. I mean, if they come back, like they better have a really good idea for them. It's there, but there's some really good ones that mixed in as well that have really stood the. Yeah,
I think Ibuki was the strongest single character to be introduced. She's not my favorite from the Third Strike cast, but they brought her back in Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5 very quickly. She's the only character from that cast that I believe that happened with. And then you have like Dudley. Dudley's super cool, but he's only been in Street Fighter 3 and 4 thus far. So there's that. Makoto, same idea there. Alex has always been this sort of like, he's got a lot of charisma, but man, you can't get it done in game, and he's kind of like this lovable loser almost sort of persona. Sweatpants drunk Alex. Yun, hate that guy. A lot of people hate that guy. Man, he's been a pain. But you can't deny how strong of a character he's been. So there is that. And yeah, there's a bunch of kind of like duds from the rest of the cast for the most part. Everyone has their fan bases, but a lot of duds. Then you go over to Street Fighter 4. I think Street Fighter 4 has the single best new character of either game in Juri, and it's just that Juri's been beloved, and she's appeared in 4 and then 5, and is already one of the first 8 announced for 6. And then Poison, she was been around for a long time, but she was actually formally introduced as a playable character in Street Fighter 4. And you had Seth, who's been brought back and evolved, and Seth's been an interesting sort of character. I did not like Seth all that much in Street Fighter 4. I don't love Seth in Street Fighter 5, but the evolution of the character between the two instances is interesting to me, and Seth is pretty fun in both games to play, especially when they're especially overpowered. Then you got the likes of like Viper, who's got a lot of fans, but she's different. She's almost like a Marvel vs. Capcom character in some respects, and so I think she's particularly hard to balance, and we haven't seen her come back since. Abel, Gouken, obviously my favorite of the bunch, and I think they should bring him back, but not many people seem to play him. You have Oni, DeCapri, and then like Fuerte, Hakan, and Rufus are some pretty big duds for Street Fighter 4's newcomers. So Let me ask you directly, John. Between the newcomer characters of Street Fighter 3 or Street Fighter 4, which game do you think did a better job? Gave more to the franchise?
I mean, again, I love Street Fighter 4's roster, so it's hands down the winner for me. Like with all these.
So I actually made my own little system here and assigned numerical values to all of the characters, and then got an average. And even though Street Fighter 3 has 16 and Street Fighter 4 has 11, that's where the average comes in. I actually gave it to Street Fighter 3. I think that even though Jury was the stronger character than anyone, the contributions that we've got from Ibuki, Dudley, Makoto, even Alex, Yun, I think that they've done more and resonated more if you add them all up compared to the contributions of Street Fighter 4, because 4 had a few good ones, one really good one, and then so many duds. So it is relatively close, but I actually gave this one to Street Fighter 3.
Okay.
But then overall roster, easily Street Fighter 4, because it had like the best of Street Fighter 3 and then a whole bunch of other good ones, from the past and whatnot. And like we said, Street Fighter 3 really missed out. The only returning characters in it, and they didn't all appear until the very end, were Ryu and Ken, Akuma, and Chun-Li. Everybody else was different. And that was a big problem, because people wanted to see, Honda, Vega, the likes, Bison in this new updated style, but they didn't get it.
Yeah, it's Capcom has cited that as one of their biggest things. Is when you have that powerful of IP and you don't draw on it again, it's incredibly foolish. It is almost, you can look at that as a masterclass of how to mess something up when you have that powerful of IP, and it doesn't mean that you just do that over and over again, because then you get like Capcom Fighting Jam, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a very lukewarm received game. Reused a bunch of sprites, it's so iterative of what we've already seen. You definitely want to add new flavors and new characters and stuff into it, but to not draw upon the most powerful IPs that you have available to you, it was just unbelievably foolish.
Yeah, it was a bad move. And again, it was sort of a situational thing, because it was a different game before it was a Street Fighter game, but even so, it's like, well, now that it's a Street Fighter game, let's bring in the Street Fighter characters.
Yeah. It's called Fix It. It's called Don't Do This, Fix It. Yeah, it's someone needed to come in, and it's such an interesting thing with Third Strike and Street Fighter 3 in general. There's a phrase, too big to fail. There was so much hype and so much other stuff surrounding Street Fighter 3's release, because that game was talked about for so long, and when it finally arrived and that was it was like, oh, this is it. Like, it was too big to succeed. That is the thing about Street Fighter 3, because people don't realize, like, if they did not live through it, which I did, and I was an arcade player and all this other kind of stuff, like the hype around Street Fighter 3 was insane, and we thought initially that Alpha was going to be Street Fighter 3. We're like, we saw the shots, we're like, oh, this is Street Fighter. This
Capcom can't count to 3. Was that the joke?
yeah, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is phenomenal and stuff like that. It's like, oh, this is not Street Fighter 3, and then Street Fighter 2 got a million versions of it, all this other kind of stuff that happened, and so when Street Fighter 3 finally showed up, like, it was a shock. And then it was like, okay, well, like, this is, the animation's great and other stuff, but like, what is this? This doesn't play enough like Street Fighter 2. This is a brand new thing, and like, oh, what? So
well, let me ask you there too, because we were talking earlier about accessibility and widely speaking about casual players, but you weren't a casual player at this time, and we all know that if you play enough Street Fighter 3, it is what it is. It's revered for a reason. But when it initially came through, everyone was hyped for it. They got it. What was that feeling of on the competitive side of thing when the first introduction? Was it actually a turnoff because it was so far away from expectations?
Yes, for a lot of people, it was a huge turnoff. The game was not well received. It was actually thought to be extremely boring, and just not fun to play type stuff. And it wasn't. Again, the Street Fighter 3 did not take off until the game lost official support. It wasn't that there was no one playing it. It wasn't that whatever. It was really extremely high level players in Japan who got showcased on stream and got showcased in different footage and whatnot. Not the VHS tapes and stuff we were handing around. Like, it took people to actually see it. Oh man, back in the day. And then people saw how the game could be played. Yeah. They saw how it was and looked in the hands of a grandmaster or a really high level player, and they're like, this is phenomenal. Like, I didn't realize you could play the game this way. This is amazing. And that is where the game took off. And so it was a very much a slow burner type of game, rising up from the ashes type stuff, because it was devastatingly bad for the longest time.
I want to talk about balance. Speaking of devastatingly bad, John, I have some things to say, but I'm going to turn it over to you to first. What do you think about the balance of Street Fighter 4 versus the balance of Street Fighter 3? And for this specifically, let's talk about the final products. So,
yeah, Street Fighter 4 blows Street Fighter 3 out of the water. Street Fighter 3 is the worst balanced fighting game in the Street Fighter series. It is disgustingly bad. It's so bad that in tournaments, they'll do a team-based tournament because you usually run singles and stuff in fighting game tournaments. That's how it is. They do team tournaments and they limit you to one character, one type of that character per team. So you can only have one Chun-Li on your team.
Right.
So the teams are often Chun-Li, Yun, and then someone else. And when you've seen 7 Chun-Li mirrors in a row, and I'm not even joking, that has happened in multiple tournaments, you start to go, okay, no, like I'm done. This is not okay anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that lack of variety and other stuff is just, it's devastating to these games. And so Street Fighter 4 just hands down the winner here.
Yeah, I do think that Street Fighter 4 was more balanced. And I grabbed the final Evo for each game, the top 8, to see which characters ended up in the top 8. So in Evo 2015 was the official final Evo for Street Fighter 4. I know it's been back there, but as like kind of the main game when everyone was playing it at its height. You had in 7th place, you had NuckleDu, who used Decapre and Guile. And then you had PR Balrog using Balrog, Tokido, Akuma. Now I'm just going to go through the characters. So you got Decapre, Guile, Balrog, Akuma, Jury, Rolento. Infiltration was there, so then you had Evil Ryu, Chun-Li, Abel, Decapre, Elena, and Jury, because Infiltration's a madman.
Because Infiltration, yeah.
Yeah.
Completely
and then Elena and Adon, and then Ken, Evil Ryu, Elena. So plenty of overlap. Everyone had a pocket Elena. We remember that. There's a couple of Evil Ryus, but hot damn, a lot of different characters there. Okay, Evo 2008 top 8. Ready for this? 5 Chun-Li's, Akuma, Ken, Yun. I think that right there tells you when they figured it out as much as they had figured it out. At the end of the day, the top 8 at Evo had 5 Chun-Li's, and they were places 1 through 5. I guess J.R. Rodriguez tied for 5th and with his Akuma, and then Ken and Yun. So that right there tells you, and that's what you hear, is that Yun and Chun are the 2 characters that you really play, and then you've got Ken and kind of the rest of the cast. And people can still play other characters and do decently well, and there are highlight moments, especially because that parry, but hot damn, I don't think that there's any question that the balance was very much topsy-turvy in that game.
Yeah, shouts to J.R. Rodriguez with the Instant Hell Murder, Raging Demon stuff. He would always do that. Whenever he had a chance to demon you, he was going to do it.
I actually heard about that in the Street Fighter 4 days, and I remember playing against him. He was also Pikachu Akuma. Is that the same person? I think it is.
Yeah, Pikachu Akuma.
And someone was like, hey, as soon as he has demon, he's going to try to do it. And,
he's going to do it.
and that very much helps me go forward in the bracket against him because of that knowledge. Yeah. So But yeah,
there was actually a footage of me jumping over him with Rose. I was supposed to jump over his demon and other stuff, and Rose was just like completely incomplete in the first version of Street Fighter 4. And there's footage of him like demoning, and I jump over him and kick, and it still grabs me because of just like how wonky her hurt boxes and other stuff were. And like he was shocked too. He's like, I can't believe this grabbed him. Like I'm gonna put up a clip like back in the day. So shouts to that. So
are there any other major categories you want to talk about?
I do, and this relates to modern stuff. I want to talk about how lousy the Street Fighter 4 port is, especially on PC, because you just have to alter your settings like just right. You have to get them in perfectly to run at a proper frame rate without massive input delays or other problems. And it sucks playing the game on most modern hardware because of how bad the PC port is. Where that is, you pop up like Third Strike, it just works. You boot that sucker up, you can play, you're good to go. You don't have to tweak anything. But with playing online with Street Fighter 4, if people don't have their settings fully dialed in and it's hard to find the right settings and what to do, like the netcode is even worse. So take the horrible delay-based netcode and then put PC port problems on top of it, and it literally makes the game unplayable for some people. And what is the worst thing you can have with a game? Not being able to play it. Like whatever opinion you have on it is fine, but literally Street Fighter 4 is unplayable for some people unless you dial on these settings perfectly, and you have to have good knowledge and other stuff. That is how lousy the PC port of Street Fighter 4 is, and most people are going to be playing that game on PC in this day and age because one, it's the most popular platform now in the FGC, and then two, there's no way to get the game on except for PS4 and other stuff. Like you could get it like that way, but like there's so few ways to play the game on modern hardware except for on PC. And when that version of it sucks terribly bad, Like, what are you doing? But again, you contrast it to Third Strike, and it's like, oh, I could just boot this sucker up. I can play it on a bunch of different platforms. It's so much more easy to get into it and to play it. Like, that is a huge win for Third Strike, because it's like, if you actually want to play these games, which is, a huge point here, you could do so. You could do so with Third Strike, but with Street Fighter 4, it's like, okay, no, you have to jump through 50 hoops, and then even then, you're going to have a really bad experience.
So the ability to play in modern times would definitely go to Third Strike currently, although, like we said, that will probably change as in the not too distant future, when inevitably Street Fighter 4 gets a re-release and they dot some I's and cross some network-related T's. But so as things stand right now, though, I would say that Street Fighter 3 is more accessible online, and online has become not just an important but an integral part of the experience. So fair enough. All right, well then I think we should come to some final conclusions. So John, final conclusion, when it's all said and done, which one's better and why?
Third Strike hands down wins, because if you want to play something, if you actually want to experience it, you want to have some fun with your friends and stuff, a Third Strike is a massively better experience in pretty much all instances and cases. There are some exceptions here. Like we say, the character balance can be an issue, but that's really only at the highest levels of play, because at lower levels you can play Alex, you can play 12, you can do all this other kind of stuff, and it's fine. If you're playing competitively, that is where things fall apart, but it also falls apart for Street Fighter 4 because you have the option select fest, you have all that other kind of stuff going on. So in my opinion, if you're going to play something right here, right now, Third Strike is a vastly better game to play for all the reasons I've outlined.
Well, I would say that in terms of which game is more fun to play for casuals right off the bat, I would say Street Fighter 4. I think there are more characters to choose from. I think that it's more intuitive, it's easier execution at that lower level. And so I would actually give, as I said earlier, the point to Street Fighter 4. But as I look at the bigger pictures for both games, and I think about it, again, Street Fighter 3 hits the highest high. It burns the hottest in a particular category that is extremely important, and that is in a high-level gameplay. I do think that it's probably the purest form of Street Fighter, maybe of fighting games, but I'll keep it just at Street Fighter, when you are at high-level Street Fighter 3, Third Strike. That said, I think that Street Fighter 4 ultimately did more for the franchise and the community with its release and its boom. I think it has a better balance overall. I think that it does not get as high up or as bright as Street Fighter 3 in the gameplay avenue, but it's got some pretty strong, like B pluses instead of Street Fighter 3's A plus. It's got a bunch of B pluses instead. And overall, with all contributions and such considered, I would give the Street Fighter 4 as an overall better game when you think about every aspect of it. So there it is. We're completely divided. So it's going to go to the comments section to find out what actually is. Because that's where you go for final authority on anything, as a comment section. So you guys got to let us know your opinions. And like I said at the beginning, this comes down to what aspects of the game you prioritize most. So maybe you don't care about online play. Maybe it's just like, I have friends come over and we play Street Fighter 3 or Street Fighter 4 offline, and so all of that is moot to me. Maybe it's the most important thing ever because you live out in the middle of nowhere with really good internet somewhere. But whatever it is, we'd love to hear it, because this is an interesting thing, I think. Like, people can't stop comparing fighting games, and it's usually the current one with the most recent one, but we did that already in a Street Fighter 4 versus Street Fighter 5 video from like 50 years ago, or at least a year ago now at this point. So be sure to check that one out. But yeah, let us know what you guys think in terms of this debate. And if you want to see other games discussed and face off in the EventHubs Octagon, as I just invented, let us know there too, because we'd be happy to do it again.